Hey everybody, hey, it's chapter 10, okay? So let me go ahead and share my screen. Here we go, got it. Okay, so what do we got going here? Chapter 10, mobile device management and bring your own device fundamentals, okay? So mobile device management, okay? MDM features, application distribution, push technology, the ability to sit there and say, hey, I have applications and I would put it out to all my devices that are there, okay? Again, one of the things that I'm a little hesitant about when you got mobile device management is when you insert BYOD, bring your own device and stuff, because making sure that bring your own device has compliance capability is always a trick, okay? And so it's much easier for the company to sit there and say, but this is the company's cell phone, not Mark's personal cell phone, okay? But again, that requires then, hey, companies got to spend money to buy cell phones. So it's cheaper to buy cell phones. So there's a little bit of a trade-off in terms of, okay, well, if you're going to let the employees have their own phones, okay, then you're going to have to make sure that they maintain all the security associated with it, okay, as opposed to then spend the money to then buy the company phones, okay, kind of thing. So it's just up to the company and the requirements and the privacy laws and stuff that go along with it. So compliance reporting and content and location services used, okay? So what are some common things that we have to address in MDMs, okay? Password control, policy enforcements, remote access, lock or not or whatever and stuff, remote wipe, when those devices are lost or whatever, okay? Or lock or unlock things, okay? Secure communications, a virtual private network or whatever. Telecommunications expense and management. Okay, two common ones. You have software as a service and in-house on premises. Okay, so software as a service, cloud management solutions. Okay, and so managing them through a data center. Again, we see it as software as a service for a lot of things. Okay, so we're running that software as a service out there to all these devices, and so we're going to manage these things over that SaaS environment. Okay, what are some advantages to a SaaS? Hardware investments are not required because we're controlling it by software. Installation and setup time is minimal. Less administration because we're doing it at the software and pushing that out to the devices and can be controlled at the locations. Disadvantages, yeah, sometimes the SaaS is whatever is going to require, fees, a subscription fee, because we didn't buy a copy of Microsoft Office. We're just simply paying a monthly subscription to use Microsoft Office. Got it. Okay. So anyway, internet connection required for all management control and concern about unauthorized access to the data. Again, back to like the example of Microsoft Office. If you buy Microsoft Office, you have a purchase, but then you have to do all the updates on a regular basis. When you have software as a service, the Office is always updated in the background. So it's always the latest and the greatest there. So something about, to be said about software as a service as well. Okay. In-house on-premises advantages can be maintained within the organization's data center, no recurring monthly because you're taking care of it yourself. You're doing your own infrastructure basically from that. What are some disadvantages? Investment required for hardware and software. Yeah, you basically have to have your own data center. Required to set up and maintain and administrate. All that takes money. We're at the college, we're big enough and stuff, so we have a lot of full-time employees in our IT area, okay? But a small company may not be able to afford all that. They don't have necessarily the money for all that hardware, investment. And so they're going to go to cloud services and then pay AWS or something like that to be able to use their network and then scale up and down. And then so everything just becomes a software as a service. There are some advantages, when that company is starting to stress out, they can scale up or scale back depending upon, how the company is doing, okay? Because they don't actually own the equipment, they own a limited access to the equipment and they use the cloud services as that process. So something to keep in mind. Choosing between the software service or in-house, what is the corporate policy? Some companies will have their own set policies, schools, hospitals, whatever. What are the security concerns? And then what is the cost of that, okay? Devices, the operating system platform, are they Android, BlackBerry, iOS, Windows, whatever, Apple. I mean, it's just, iOS stuff, very protective. A friend of mine and stuff, he works for the community hospitals, whatever, and so he deploys like iPads, okay, throughout the hospital system, and he may be deploying 500 iPads. Well, those things have to be all configured, okay, and then updated and whatever and pushed out, to be able to get them in the hands of the medical professionals. Okay, mobile application stores, enterprise, app stores, whatever they're there, consumer mobile app stores like you and I know. Okay, pushing that content to that mobile device allows for the corporate and other applications to push. Okay, company issued, or again, bring your own device. Who's going to be responsible for that? Okay. And then who's going to be responsible for the liability if that were compromised? Okay. Information that can be pushed, operating system updates, sure. Configuration of Wi-Fi profiles, sure. Security information, perhaps a video on how to or something like that. Email configurations as well. Okay. On your mobile device management administrative permissions, yeah, mobile device policies, group policies, to be able to control stuff, and then have the ability to remote walk or remote wipe or whatever, or password controls on our devices. Okay. Keep in mind, if you're a salesperson, you may have privy to some of the internal accounting. You may not be able to change them, but you still may have some privy and responsibility of how you share that information with your potential customers. Okay. Doesn't mean you want to turn over your device to them. Okay. Anyway, high availability and redundancy, ensure that access will always be ready. Okay. And then device groups and stuff, you can have an administrator and have groups to be able to do that. Geofencing. Okay. You can then establish that these devices are going to stay within this specific area. Okay. We're not going to support everything. We're going to support everything as a campus geofencing. So we'll cover everything on City College, but once it leaves our fencing area, our e-fence, whatever, then it's no longer secure. Okay. It's no longer going to be accessible. Okay. So if something like, geolocation, identifying where something is at, okay, to be able to spot and say, hey, this device is here on campus, this device is here in the building. If you've ever lost your phone, if you have an iPhone, you had to find my iPhone, whatever, I inadvertently left my iPhone 13 at Home Depot in Madera. Okay, and I used the Find My Phone and tracked it down literally to within 10 or 15 feet inside the building. So it was quite an endeavor. Okay, and so that happens. I had another time where my brother came down from Sacramento, and he gave me a ride to my car, whatever. And unbeknownst to me, my cell phone fell out of my pocket. I said goodbye to him. He started heading off to Sacramento. And I started looking for my phone. So where the heck it is? And I went into the house and started tracking. I go, okay, it's on a ride going up to 99. Okay, he was on his way to Sacramento. And so it by the time we caught up with him was all the way, he had gotten all the way back home and then had to re-meet in Stockton to be able to hand off the phone again. So anyway, it's just one of those things that are out there. So, knowing where devices are at and locations and stuff is pretty important. Captive and self-service portals and stuff like that, credentials and usernames, allows multiple users to register their devices and so on. Okay. Security policy implementation. Okay. What are your purpose? What's the scope? What kind of details and enforcement are you going to have? And then how are you going to update and maintain those things? Okay. Some cloud management dashboard software, perhaps, okay, used to create profiles. Okay, there's software that's out there. Microsoft has stuff as well. AWS, again, you could get it from Google, Apple, whatever. There's a lot of cloud services that are out there. The question is how much money you got to be able to afford whatever you can afford. Okay, other additional policies, acceptable use policy. Balancing security and usability, backup, restores, recovery, and so on. Okay. Technology profiles. Okay. What are the parameters and instructions for mobile devices, emails, internet access and stuff? What are your Wi-Fi access requirements going to be? And can I do VPN configurations or changes, whatever? Again, mentioned group profiles, policies, and profile for pilot testing. So, hey, you know what, before you deploy it all and stuff, you might want to pilot a small program, with a few devices and see what works and what doesn't and stuff, and see what kind of controls that are practical, especially with things like geofencings and locations and stuff like that, and push out implementations. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Chapter 10, again, one simple concept, with mobile device management. But it's actually a little bit more common than you probably think of. We don't think about it at home because we're our own computers and stuff like that, our own devices, whatever. But in an environment and stuff where you have, a lot of employees, especially maybe you're in Salesforce or something like that, whatever, then having mobile devices in their hands stuff means you have an extra layer of responsibility, and then how you're going to deploy those and support those and protect them. Okay. All right. Hope that helps. Let me go ahead and stop the share of my screen. And that was the end. So have a great day.